I want to get more informed here in being or trying to be a better ally or the best ally that I can be when marginalized communities are under threat or are vulnerable. And I guess that gets dismissed as virtue signaling, but like I've got a lot of learning to do around not being okay with this woman because of the transphobia that there is in this country being a state representative in Montana and being someone who can't speak freely around freedom and democracy because the government is working to marginalize her and what it is that she is fighting for because people don't understand the transgender movement and they're fighting over it. And they're here to tell you that Representative Zephyr is some sort of predator as opposed to what the trans community so often is, which is prey, which is, under attack and besieged violently and in the worst of ways by powerful people going after the most vulnerable of communities. So I want to understand it better. And I thank you, Representative Zephyr, for joining us, Zoe. And I want to talk to you about Dwayne Wade fleeing the state of Florida because he doesn't feel safety for his daughter. But I'd also like to just talk sports with you because Mike Ryan is obsessed with the Panthers and wants to talk about the forecheck. And I don't know which way to go with this interview.
We can talk Houston Dynamo, too. Unbeatable at home. I mean, they just don't let teams score right now. I don't get it.
Listen, they're an early team. They'll fade. They'll fade as the Texas Heat comes out. So will the Dynamo.
Do you think the Heat has something to do with the Knicks' performance when they come down to Miami? Because that's what Jalen Rose and Mike Greenberg, who's played many games in the NBA himself, that's what they think.
You travel to Texas, you come with an excuse in your pocket. That's what I've always learned.
Can you tell me what's going on with Montana for those who don't care for me, sounding like I'm sermonizing? Just what's happening to you seems just deeply unfair and not very American, but my guess is that you feel from every angle that you're under siege and you're trying to represent something differently in government in America.
Yeah, like politicians do, I went through my community and talked to them as I was campaigning and said, what are the issues that matter to you? What do you care about? And I heard, housing, healthcare, human rights. Those are the big three. And so when I go onto my House floor, I speak on those bills passionately. As a member of the trans community, when a bill targets my community, I speak about that as well. And we'd seen a litany of attacks against the LGBTQ community, targeting our art forms, our histories, allowing people to bully us in schools and to deny us healthcare. And I spoke out against one of those bills, speaking to real harm. There was an ER doctor who reached out to us and said a patient came in suicidal. And when they were talking to them, the trans patient said, my state doesn't want me. That's why this happened. There was a trans teenager who attempted to take her life while watching one of these hearings. So when I stood up to testify to my colleagues who were going to vote yes on that bill, I wanted to make it clear, if you vote for this bill, there's real harm. There are deaths that will be on your hands.
Well, the terminology was objected to, right? It's not just death. You said blood on your hands. That's why you got kicked out, correct?
I said, there is blood on your hands. And after that, the speaker said, I'm not going to call on you anymore. Not just on these bills, but any bill. And I said, in doing so, it's not just me and my free speech you're taking away. You have stripped my constituents of their right to be heard. And my constituents and many people from Montana came to a rally to support me and went and watched hours worth of hearings on the House floor. And when I rose to speak and the speaker denied me, they began chanting, let her speak, because they understood we sent her here. She is the voice to represent us in government. If they don't have that, what do we have as our foundations in this country if not representation?
I suppose I'm going to be too woke here, but they've also been trying to harm you with the pronouns, correct? Like it's purposefully, it's meant to cut, is it not?
Yeah, but I'm used to the hypocritical nature of that, to call for civility while misgendering me. This is a group of politicians who've called for limited government, but have used government to take away the healthcare and the rights of communities that they disagree with. So it was meant to attack, but it did not catch me off guard.
Where are you with it as you speak to us now? Do you feel somewhat safer in your skin in a free America because you feel the people backing you, or do you feel isolated by legislation that is meant to attack you and you feel less safe than you did a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
I have signed every press statement with the closing with pride and determination. And I feel both of those things. I feel proud of my community, both the LGBTQ community and my constituents, for standing up for democracy, for standing up and saying, this isn't how government should work. And I think I feel determined to try to write things as best as I can, to try to speak out against these bills, but also I think it was very clear that when Republicans kicked me off the House floor, much like when Republicans expelled people in Tennessee, the world turned and looked and said, this is objectively wrong. This is not how our country should work. And they've learned that there are folks on the extreme right of this country who would toss away democracy to get their ideological goals. And when you see that, and when you see the support that rises from people who recognize that is wrong, it's hard to feel anything but hope.
Speaking on hypocrisy, it seems like lately there's been a sudden interest from especially Republican politicians in women's sports. And I know that this is now somewhere where I know you as yourself as a sports fan and as an elected representative have seen transphobia now be injected into especially youth sports. So as someone who is in government, how has sports become a weapon to wield against people in the trans community?
So we saw the attacks on trans athletes in sports as the initial injection point for the people whose goal is not protection of sports. Their goal is, to use their words, the elimination of trans people from public life entirely. They targeted sports because they thought that was an inroad. And that's what we saw at the states, and it's what we're seeing this year at the federal level. And as you point out, it is, they will use one example of an athlete doing well, Leah Thomas, NCAA swimmer. They'll use that example and then ignore the fact that Leah Thomas's record was beaten by a cisgender athlete the very next year. And so they use it to drum up fear in a venue they think will get play. But I could talk all day about trans people and trans athletics and how that is an important part of our existence as well.
But so help me understand this part of it. Help me understand wherever it is that there is to be some sort of understanding for people who think just much differently about these things and say, well, no, this is where I draw the line. In a swimming pool in Pennsylvania, Leah has gone through what she has gone through because she wants to dominate these meets. She wants to join a community with higher suicide rates, a community that's going to be preyed on so that she can beat other women at swimming. It's used as a cruel weapon against you, but what do you say to the people that are like, well, in the combat sports or the physical sports, men have a physical advantage, and now you're contaminating sports. It's the only place we can make this argument and rationalize away. We don't think all people should be equal.
So there's a handful of things I look at. The first of which is underlying no trans person is transitioning to win athletics. If you're in the NCAA, you're going on hormone replacement therapy for years before you're competing in athletics. And trans people are just not doing that. We're doing it to live happy, fulfilling lives. Secondly, I'd say trans people are underrepresented in athletics. We compete at a lower rate than our peers. We win at a lower rate than our peers. And then thirdly, I think about, obviously there's the science that says that we actually don't have an advantage. Leah Thomas was 10 seconds behind the men's world record prior to her transition, and then 10 seconds behind the women's world record following. But I think about what it means as a trans athlete. And if your thought is that trans athletes shouldn't win, imagine telling your child growing up, yes, you can play sports. Yes, you'll develop the understanding of teamwork and working hard and bettering yourself. But make sure you take third. Make sure you don't work hard. Don't work too hard. Because if you are successful, well, then everyone's going to say, well, we shouldn't allow you in there. And to me, that is contrary to the very nature of sports and working hard.
It is a complicated issue that governing bodies have had difficulty trying to make rules for, but I just can't give much credence to someone alleging that someone would be putting themselves through this to dominate a swim meet. I mean, listen to yourselves somewhat. Like, what?
No, but that's
like they want to dominate in sports.
No, but that's where,
and they're putting themselves through all this trauma and all this physical pain to just become who they feel they are to win a swim meet. I can't even grasp that reality.
Well, but correct me if I'm wrong, though, Representative Zephyr. Isn't this the argument that can be made? Well, there I get to feel more right about my ideas about who's equal and who's not equal. No, I can file it under religion. I will not make gender something that's on a spectrum. I can win the argument of, you understand why somebody who is a man shouldn't be boxing with somebody who's a woman physically. And you understand that that would be the nature of the division that uses you as a weapon.
So the argument underpinning why trans women shouldn't be in sports is their argument is that they do not believe trans women are women. And I will say full stop, trans women are women. Like, there's not an asterisk on my womanhood. And I say this as someone who was a cross-country runner, who was a 5-time state wrestling champion, who has watched the shifts in my body, the shifts in my athletic ability. The percentiles I fall in are the same for women now as they were for men. And I think it's important that the people seeking these attacks are coming in, kind of as you mentioned, not with well, I really deeply care about women's sports issues and here's what I want to talk about. They're coming in saying trans women aren't women and I'm going to use whatever arguments I can for that. And then you look at high-level cisgender women athletes like Megan Rapinoe coming in and saying, actually, no, trans girls belong in sports. Trans people belong in sports.
But there's also a level of just baked in sports misogyny, good old misogyny in there, right? Like, can you speak to how just I find it incredibly frustrating when I see former professional female athletes that are anti-trans women in sports because they are admitting that there is like a different level of competition and that women are worse than men at sports, just blanketly. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that as a former athlete.
What we see is, resources. What are the resources for training facilities? What are the monetary investments so someone can spend their time dedicating themselves to a sport? Growing up, I think even something like chess, like who is getting the opportunities at a young age to make those trainings happen? And I think that's what we see across women's sports. We see less funding, less attention, less money. And that will ultimately, that leads to issues. And then it leads to the question of like Biden's Title IX proposed policy says, you can't have blanket bans against trans people, but if scholarships are on the line down the road. And I picture like a young trans girl who's on her basketball team, starting at age 9, playing with her girlfriends, working hard, et cetera, has a great time, and then gets to her senior year and they say, we know you've been playing with the team for 6 years, but there's scholarships here. So now you can't. But don't worry, badminton or something that maybe doesn't have as many scholarship opportunities. That's fine for you. You can go there.
We have,
and so,
forgive me, we've run out of time. I didn't mean to interrupt you. The thing that you mentioned about Biden also felt hurtful, though, correct? The idea that he has been making a different argument until now, and now Biden, you do not have what feels like support from the top from anybody, correct?
What I would say is you have good intention, a desire to protect trans people. But when trans people aren't there crafting the policies, you see the gaps. And to me, the Biden policy needs to make sure that it acknowledges trans people belong in sports. If there are reasons for their partial exclusion, medical transition, waiting for that, there needs to be a pathway for competition at all levels of sports. I don't think there was malice in Biden's work, but I do think it missed the mark. And it's important, if we're going to protect trans people and trans athletes, we need to make sure we get it right.
Thank you for the time, Representative. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.